right? So it's really how you think about and how you apply Agile to whatever it is you're trying to build. It is not a prescriptive methodology or a prescriptive process for developing software. Agile is meant to be um, fluid. It's meant to say, I want to take something, I want to make it better, and you apply that as you can, as you see fit. We'll get into some Agile Manifesto and some principles. So, real quick, Agile in its formality has only been around since maybe 2001, really formally, but the origins of it and ideas have been around for years. So back in the 50s, you had Toyota, who really started Kanban or lean processes in the factory. They really just wanted to do things better. They wanted to make cars more efficiently. They wanted to save money. They wanted to save cost and time. Um, and so they developed a Kanban model to do such to do that. In 1994, you had the unified process and Dsdm. This kind of introduced incrementally building products. So this is where the concept of increments was were formally introduced. 1995, Scrum was introduced, and I'll go into Scrum a little bit in more detail during this presentation. 96, crystal clear and extreme programming. Um, this was really a focus on paired programming, where two heads working on one task is better than one. That was really kind of driven with that. Um, 1997, adaptive software development and feature-driven development is where the concept of features come from, and some estimating actually came from those frameworks as well. And then 2001, the Agile Manifesto was born. So that was a group of people, a group of maybe 17 people who were leaders in the industry of technology, and they went on a skiing trip actually, probably had a couple of drinks, and they were thinking, hey, how can we do uh, building software better? How can we build software better? So they came up with this manifesto, and we'll go through that real quickly. So it starts off by saying we are uncovering better ways of developing software by doing it and helping others do it. Through this work, we come to value individuals and interactions over processes and tools, working software over comprehensive documentation, customer collaboration over contract negotiation, responding to change over following a plan. While there is value in the items on the bottom, we value the items on the top more. So just to kind of go on this a little bit, interactions, individuals and interactions over processes and tools. So we all use different tools, Slack, whether it's Slack, GitHub or whatever. So it's not saying we go away from the tools we need, but we are focusing on that individual and that interaction, that collaboration that you have with a person. Um, Agile is very much a team sport. It's not you taking something and going off in your hole and finishing. Is I'm talking to developers, I'm talking to testers, I'm collaborating, trying to figure out the best way to do that. Working software over comprehensive documentation. Not to say that you shouldn't document, like documentation is important, but working software is the ultimate goal, right? The quality of the software that you're putting out there. Customer collaboration over contract negotiation. So part of the contract negotiation, I like to kind of say, when you're thinking about project waterfalls or waterfall projects, where you have a design document or you have a requirements document, and it has to be signed by 45 different people who you never met, and before you can start any of the work. Well, that's a form of a contract. Well, instead of focusing on that so much, those things are important as well, but having a direct relation with the customer to know their wants and needs it's so much more valuable, right? So if I'm delivering a product to a customer and I'm in tune with what that customer wants, I can make those changes as needed and get them the product that they need. And responding to change over following a plan. So it is important to plan. Like, I don't want to discontinue that. Agile is all about planning, but when the plan fails, what happens next, right? So responding to that change is important. Having a plan is cool until the plan doesn't work, and you have to kind of adjust from there. So that's the manifesto. With the manifesto, there's also 12 principles that go along with those. So I'll go over those briefly. Delivering value, self-explanatory, close collaboration. Again, this is a team sport. Self-organizing and cross-functional teams. I think this is important, especially when you get into agile transformation and you get, in front of executives who don't normally operate this way, right? So the idea of agile is you put a team together, you build a team of the brightest and best that you can find, and you let them go to work, and you let them figure it out, and you let them organize, and you let them kind of control the outcomes, right? It's all about trust and giving some power to the team at the team level. Adaptability, again, a plan is great. We should always plan, but we have to be ready to adapt when the plan fails. Evolutionary development. So agile is all about, as the technology changes and it gets better, we want to incorporate that technology into the products that we build. Early and often delivery. We want to ship stuff fast, and I know my CDS folks on the call can attest to that. Empowered and trust. Right along with that, self-organizing. To be able to do that, you have to empower teams. You have to trust them that they will get the work done. Again, rapid and flexible response to change is just part of the theme. There is a focus on quality. In other sessions that I've been in, when we talk about agile, people seem to think that we had to sacrifice quality to get stuff out the door, and that's not true at all. We want to make sure that we want to deliver fast, we want to deliver often, but we want to give a quality product as well. We don't want to just put anything out into production. We want to build something that people can trust and they can use, and stuff that we'll be proud of. Sustainable development is just focusing on the stuff that we build, being able to sustain it throughout its life cycle. Simplicity is important, right? Not overcomplicating things, not trying to plan out everything. Let's be simple. Let's plan out in small increments. And to me, this last one is probably the most important: continuous feedback and improvement. Agile is all about getting better. How can we do this better? How can we improve? And incorporating those feedback loops. So if you take the Agile Manifesto and the 12 principles, and you kind of can apply these, or you think these make sense in the work that you're doing, that's really agile, to be honest. So we talk about agile is an iterative, adaptive method of product engagement, focusing on continuous improvement, scope flexibility, team input, and delivery of essential quality products, right? So that is the goal we're trying to get to. So with this slide, agile is the umbrella. So you have your agile umbrella, and you have many different frameworks that fall under the umbrella. I just named a few here. There are so many more. You have, besides Scrum and Kanban, you have SAFe, you have LESS, you have Scrum at Scale, so many different frameworks, but ideally those frameworks should fall under that agile framework, those agile principles. Scrum is highlighted here because more often than not, you see Scrum implemented, whether good or bad, in most instances. If a company says, "Oh, we are agile," 9 times out of 10 they're doing Scrum. So Scrum is just one of the most or the most popular framework. All right, how agile works in simplicity. So when you think about a waterfall project, or you think about a project planned development, you think about those different phases of design, planning, design, development, or testing and deployment, or something like that. They all kind of different, but it's about the same thing. So those in those frameworks, those things are very sequential. So you have to have, you go through your planning phase first before you finish. After you finish planning, you can design. Once you finish design, you start building something. After you build it, you test it. Uh, where Agile is different is each one of these little corals here are increment, and in every increment, you want to do that full life cycle. You try to do it anyway. So you try to plan something, you analyze it, you design it, you code it, then you validate it. And then you do that in small increments. And then the next increment, you take what you built in the first increment and you just try to make it better and build on that. That's the idea at a very, very super high level. Project plan driven work. Again, if you see at the bottom, you have your phases of plan, design, develop, test, and release. With anything that you approach, there's always the cone of uncertainty. I'm sure you guys have seen the cone of uncertainty before. All this is saying is at the beginning of any work that you attempt, you know the very least about it. The problem with project plan development is you try to do all your planning up front, and you're still in that cone of uncertainty until you get into development. Once you start developing, you kind of understand what you're getting into. Once you start testing it and you create those defects, you really know what you're getting into now. That curve goes up. But the problem is you don't really release or provide value until you get to the end of that life cycle. In most cases, and I know this is a little bit extreme, but we can talk about that. In Agile, the difference is you have those increments, and in each increment, you're trying to do your planning, your designing, your coding, and you're validating in an increment. But you're only taking small chunks. So again, you still have that same cone of uncertainty at the beginning because you don't know what you're getting into. And every increment, or in this case, a 2-week sprint, you're building something and you're releasing it at the end of that 2-week sprint, and you're giving it to your customer. You build on it again and you release something in the next 2 weeks, the next 2 weeks again. So that incremental building is key in Agile, right? So we're not trying to build the whole shebang at once. We're taking small pieces, we're building it out, and we're releasing it. We're getting that feedback from our users or our customers, and we build a little bit more and we release that. So at the very beginning of the phase, you have something of value that you can give to your customer versus them waiting at the very end when you think you've done, right? So let's say a project takes a year, right? And you do all your planning and stuff up front. By the time you release it at the end of the year, your requirements probably are invalid by the time, because technology has changed. Your customer, what they want has changed, right? So instead of doing that, let's give them something that they can use incrementally, and then we can build on it and make it better as we go. Sorry. So let's jump into Scrum a little bit. Scrum is one of the frameworks that is used to apply Agile to a project or to a product, whichever one. Scrum has its own set of pillars as well. So in Scrum, it's looking to be transparent. So at any given time, anybody who wants to know what's going on with this project should have visibility into it. We're not trying to hide anything. We want to be transparent because we want to get that feedback. That continuous inspection, we always looking to improve, whether it's the software or whether it's the processes that we're using. And adaptation, we want to make changes where necessary if they're needed. So your Scrum Pillars fall right in a line to that Agile Manifesto and those 12 principles. Some of the values with Scrum, focus. So we're focusing on small increments, a few things at a time. We're not trying to build the entire solution all at once. Openness, we're collaborating, we're working together. There is a sense of commitment. And when I say commitment is when, as a team, if we decide that we want to do something, we commit to doing it and to making it as the best we can, right? Courage. Working in a team environment, and working in a close-knit team, sometimes there's some feedback that you had to give somebody that might not be so pleasant. So you have to have the courage to do that and be able to speak up. But at the same time, there's the respect aspect, right? So if I do need to give you some feedback, so if I had to give Amar some feedback, I need to be respectable in my feedback, and I need him to know that this is coming from a good place, because my idea is I want to make the team better, and I'm not just singling you out, right? So that can be hard. That can be hard to do at times, but we want to make sure that we are giving feedback. We have the courage to do so, but we also be respectable in doing that. So the Scrum process looks a little bit like this. You start off with some stakeholders who want to get something done. And you probably can have different stakeholders coming from different areas, from the business, from tech, from policy, from law, compliance, or whatever it is, right? They feed that information into to the product owner, and it's the product owner's responsibility to prioritize the backlog or to prioritize the work that's needed. From that backlog, we're going to take a subset of that and we're going to create a sprint backlog. Your sprint backlog is the work that you want to do right there for that sprint. So you have a planning session, and I'll get into some of the ceremonies a little bit more in detail as well, but you have a planning session where you bring this sprint backlog in front of the team and say, hey, for the next 2 weeks, here's the plan, here's what we want to try to get accomplished. All right, and the team agrees or they disagree. We have that discussion, we solidify it, we get into our sprint. Most sprints are 2-week cycles. They can go from 2 weeks to 4 weeks, depending on the type of work that you're doing. I've seen 1 week sprints as well, but that's when the team starts to work. You have a Scrum Master who is there to facilitate not just the daily stand-up, but the kind of remove impediments for the team to make sure the team can do their job, right? So, you know, I say a good Scrum Master may not know all the answers, but they know how to get to the answer, right? So, and a good Scrum Master is resourceful in that way. Throughout your sprint, you have what's called refinements, or backlog refinements, where you are trying to get ahead of your current sprint. So your current sprint is now set. You're dipping into the backlog to see what other stuff we can get ready for the next upcoming sprints. Towards the end of your sprint, you're going to have a sprint review, and that's where the team kind of sits down with the stakeholders, the product owners, and they talk about and demo what they did for the 2 weeks. And then after that, you're going to have a retrospective where the team is focusing on getting better, right? So ceremonies in a little bit more detail. So you have that same cycle in your sprint. Your daily stand-up is supposed to be a 15-minute meeting that answers 3 questions. What did you do yesterday? What do you plan on doing today? And what impediments do you have? This meeting is not really designed to be a status meeting. I know a lot of people kind of get confused with that. This meeting is really to move work across work streams, right? So here's what I'm a developer. Here's what I'm working on today. Here's what I worked on yesterday. This is what I plan on doing today. I've been having some problems with this code or with whatever. And that's an indicator for somebody else on the team to be like, oh, you know what? I have experience in that. I can help you. Let's team up. Let's pair up together, and we can get you through that, right? So it's not intended to be a status meeting. It's not to say, oh, you didn't do anything yesterday. What were you doing? It's more so to move work along, and to get stuff done. Your sprint planning, that's the first day of the sprint. It's usually a 2 to 3 hour meeting. You are talking about the work that's coming up in the sprint, making sure everyone kind of agrees with it. In some levels or in some on some teams, depending on how you do work, there's a level of subtasking those stories to get a little more granular. But at the end of the sprint planning meeting, the idea is to say, hey, we have a body of work that we're going to commit to try to get done in the duration of our sprint, whatever that is, if it's 2 weeks or 3 weeks. Backlog refinement, again, I kind of talked about. This is kind of getting ahead of future sprints. So you're refining stories, you're talking about stories, making sure all the materials that you need are there. If you have documentation that you need, or if you need assistance from another team, like all of that should be hashed out at your refinement session to try to make sure you have the things you need to pull those stories into an upcoming sprint. Your sprint review and demo is at the last day of the sprint. It's usually a 1 to 2 hour meeting where the team reviews what they did during the sprint, and if it's applicable, they can demo something, they can show something. Not all sprint reviews end with a demo, right? So if you're doing some back end work, or you change some business requirements, you may not have anything to show about it, to show for that, but you can talk about it, right? You can let your stakeholders know what it is that you did. So I think a lot of people get, I don't want to say disappointed, but there's sometimes some disappointment around not being able to demo. But it's really more about the conversation. It's really more about, what did you guys accomplish during the sprint, and having that discussion. And then the sprint retro, the last day of the sprint, usually an hour. Sometimes you need a little bit longer, depending on how your sprint goes. But this is a venting session. This is time for the team to kind of like let out some frustrations, talk about how the sprint went, but more importantly, not to just complain, but to come up with some solutions of how we can do things better, right? So if you're not talking about what we can do to make things better, then your retros are really no good, right? You really just in there complaining, right? So we want to get the frustrations out. We want it to be a safe place, but we want to leave that meeting with a plan or some goals that we want to accomplish to help us get better. Some other activities that may come along with that are roadmap review. So if you're a part of a product team that has built out a roadmap, it is always good to review the roadmap. I usually review the roadmap with my teams during sprint planning, right? So at the beginning of the sprint planning, I pull my roadmap out and I can say, hey, on the roadmap, we are here, or we are behind, or whatever it is, just so the team can get a holistic view of what we're trying to do. But it's recommended that you set aside some time, quarterly, whatever that is, to talk about the roadmap, just to be transparent, just so everybody can kind of see where you're going. If you are on a project or program that is scaling, or that has multiple Scrum teams, you may enter in something that's called a Scrum Scrums. And that's kind of where a representative from each team meets on a frequent basis, and they talk about impediments that are like cross team impediments, or cross team dependencies, right? And it's a good way to, if I need another team to do something, I may go to Parrish's team and say, hey, we need for you guys to put some code into our lower environment so we can do whatever. And Paris may say, man, we're not going to get to that till 2 sprints from now. Cool. All right. I know that now, and I can kind of coordinate my work based off that. So that conversation usually happens at the Scrum Scrums, just a cross team type of collaborative meeting to talk through different types of issues or concerns.
Hey, Adrian.
Yes, sir.
Is the quality built into the sprint review and demo, or is that a separate process altogether?
So your quality should be built into, it really should be built into your day-to-day work, right? So like, man, I wish I had a board that I could show you, but I don't have whiteboard. So usually most Scrum teams have a tool that they use, whether it's Jira or version 1 or whatever that is, right? And so the idea is if you have a team that's set up with developers and testing, as soon as an increment of work is done, it should be tested before the sprint is over with. So that testing should be done. So if you have 5 items that you're trying to get done for the sprint, as soon as item number 1 is available, they should start testing it, and then your team should be working on item number 2. Then when item 2 becomes available, they may have some issues with number 1. They say, "Oh, we found some stuff wrong with number 1. We need you to fix it." So within that cycle of your sprint, you should be building that quality in um, during that.
Thank you.
And
That's
I,
a good
I
question.
have a question as well that
Yeah.
ties into that as well.
Okay.
Within a user story, you mentioned like the different user stories, and
Mhm.
once the user story is complete, it should be tested. Or do you also track those QA tests as well that's included within the user story, or do you create its own separate user story just for the QA task to kind of push that along as well?
Man, that is a good question. And I hate to give you like a semi-generic answer, but it's usually team-based, right? So I've seen it done both ways, where we had a we had like a Jira system, and then we had a totally separate system that tracked QA that kind of talked to them. So they would write test scripts and scenarios and defects, and it all be tracked on a whole different system. I've also seen it work where inside the same ticket, you create a user story, you break it out into subtasks, and those subtasks usually have a testing component to it, but it's all on one board or under one ticket. So it really depends on how or how your team flows. That's something that your team would kind of talk through and agree upon before you start working. But I've seen it done both ways.
Okay, thank you.
hmm I think I only have one more slide, so we can definitely get into some more questions if we need to. But are there any other questions about like the different ceremonies that happen with Scrum? Cool. So some successful team traits that most people look for when they're put together a Scrum team. Communication. Communication is key. Again, this is a team sport. You have to be able to talk. You have to be able to collaborate. So teams that work well and produce at a high frequency tend to communicate well. Planning. It's always important to plan. We always plan, right? But we have to be able to deviate from the plan when the plan goes to shit. Excuse me, I don't know if I can say that. Sorry. Uh, Giving feedback. We always want to be able to get better, and doing that is providing feedback, not being afraid, having that courage to do so. Also, it's very important to receive feedback, right? So you get on teams where you always got somebody who want to give their opinion but can't always take it. So it's just as important to be able to receive the feedback as well. Honing your craft, right? Honing your skills. So if you're a developer, um, most developers I know outside of their 9 to 5, they have something a side hustle or a side project going on, really just to get their skills better, right? So like Agile, Scrum is all about taking pride in the work that you do. So you'll see just honing your skills, getting better there, and then getting things done, man. Like your team should have a get things done mentality. Um, I think that is it for me. Oh, sorry. Team player. One last one. Again, Agile, Scrum, especially Agile, is a team sport. So just being understanding of that is important. If you're not a people person, you don't like to talk to people at all, then this may not be for you. And I've seen that. I've seen people who just want to code in silos with their headphones on and get stuff done heads down, right? So um, in Agile, it's not. There are some times where you can do that, but there a lot of these ceremonies or meetings that you have are really focused to get team input and to get team value from it. And that was my presentation. I think I've been time. Are there any other questions?
I would say, what do you feel like the most difficult aspect is when you're trying to facilitate different groups and early in the planning phase?
The most difficult part of facilitating groups in the planning phase, usually it's just getting people to focus, honestly. So like when you're doing, if you're in Scrum and you're doing a planning meeting, like I schedule 2.5, sometimes 4 hour planning sessions, right? And so like getting people to focus for that duration can be hard. So I do try to make sure I incorporate some breaks, incorporate some time that people can, just kind of relax their mind a second, and we don't go the whole 4 hours. But your planning sessions can be crucial, especially if you're just starting. If a team is just starting out, like that planning is important. You really want to kind of get ahead of the stuff that you're doing. So just kind of focusing them. Really.
Because everything you described, it really, honestly, it sounds like, yeah, this is a lot of meetings. Like,
Yeah,
you just
it
have
is.
meetings all day.
It
So
is.
it's like, how do you get work done?
So like so if you're in a 2 week sprint cycle, your heaviest meeting days are going to be the first day of the sprint and the last day of the sprint, right? So you got a planning session at the beginning of that sprint, and then at the end of the sprint, you're doing your sprint review and your retro. In between that, you have the 15-minute meeting at the beginning. Usually I do that at the beginning of the day. After that 15-minute meeting, teams get to work, right? And then in a 2-week sprint, I do schedule 2 1-hour sessions, and they're usually on separate weeks for refinement. And what I do, and also what I try to do when I do have the team for a meeting, I try to make sure that meeting is useful, right? So if I have a goal, I have agenda, if we're in refinement, I'm gonna say we got 8 stories that we're gonna get through today. If we get through those 8 stories in 30 minutes, I cut the meeting off. You know, used to holding the meeting another 30 minutes. We accomplished our goal, right? So you are right. There are a lot of meetings, but focusing those meetings and making sure that they're useful really, really helps with that as well.
What do you do if you have disagreeable members or people that are just kind of, it's hard for them to get on the same page? Like most of the group is over here, and then always a few people that are always just disagreeable. Now, would you use them maybe at a later process so that they don't hold up the agile process, or you just kind of banish them totally?
Nah, that's a good question. So most things I do, I try to get majority vote from the team. So if I have 10 members and I have 2 people that disagree, but I have 8 people that do agree, majority rules, right? But I don't just dismiss them. There's a process to where I do listen to them and the team listens to them to make sure to take their feedback in. And then because sometimes when you have people that disagree, they bring up valid points. And the people who agree can be like, you know what, I didn't think about that. Or man, you coming from a different perspective, right? So, but the to kind of settle the dispute, we always take it to a vote, and the majority usually rules. Is kind of how I do that. Now for people who I have been in situations where disagreements have gotten a little disruptive. So I had to kind of step in and be like, we have to shut this down. I had to take 2 individuals away from the main session and kind of have a discussion, kind of talk it out. But those type of things happen. I mean, when people are passionate about their work, sometimes those disagreements kind of come out. But I never try to dismiss folks because you never know where their perspective is coming from. I kind of want to hear that out but we always take it to a vote.
Do you find that, say, the people that got outvoted during one sprint, they may have an axe or a grudge and try to hold up the process on another sprint?
Yes, that has happened before. Not as often as you would think, but I have had an instance where that has happened, but that person really wasn't a good fit for that team. Is really that really was the end result with that. He just didn't fit well with what they were trying to do. So he actually was moved to another team. But when I feel people are, if I think they're not being heard, I try to like have a one-off conversation with them and say, hey man, don't take it personal, right? I mean, like keep giving your ideas, keep getting your feedback. Like, cause I always want people to be able to solicit their input and their feedback. It's not always gonna go your way, but I just try to have one-off conversations with that person if I can. And if it comes a problem, then we just have to escalate it to management or whatever we have to do. So
I have a question.
Okay.
Sorry. Yeah. So my question would be: say you have you're in a current sprint, and towards the end of the sprint, you have a task that didn't get complete. Right?
Okay.
It's like maybe 85% complete, but this is the last day of the sprint. Do you like pull that into the next sprint, or you kind of make them stay longer, or how does that work?
Man, that's a good question. So ideally, I would not like to make people stay. That's not really the goal or focus in Agile. I do understand that deadlines have to be met sometimes and stuff have to get done, right? So the ideal situation is if there is one story that is left in the sprint that is carried over to the next sprint and it's the highest priority in the next sprint, right? So that's the first thing we're going to get done to kind of knock that out the way. Very rarely making people stay late or work weekends, which has happened before. I mean, it's demoralizing, right? And so part of what makes a successful team is kind of like the morale and the team camaraderie, right? So I don't want to kill that if it's not necessary. So it's always encouraged to stay away from making people work late or working long hours. And if we can carry it over to the next sprint, that's what we should do.
Doesn't that it's kind of anti-agile, right? You have to do that. I mean, the whole thing is quick and efficient, right?
I mean, is it really quick and efficient if you working 10-hour days? And
yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Right? Yeah, exactly. I'm agreeing with you.
Goes against the whole tenet of
100%, man. Exactly, right? 100%. I agree with you.
So, Adrian, I have a question for you as well.
Yes,
which way do you feel has brought you a smoother path? Scrum, Kanban, or any of the other frameworks?
That's a good question. So, I hate to be generic again, man, but like Kanban, it all depends on the type of work you're doing, right? So like some teams and some work streams that you engage with, like Scrum doesn't work for. So if you move into a Kanban model, works better. And if I get another chance to do one of these, we can go into Kanban a little more deep into detail. But Kanban is really more of a pull method, right? So it's not really a decided backlog. It is, hey, this is the next thing that needs to happen. I'm going to pull it into what I'm doing. I'm going to analyze it and make sure it needs to be worked. Then I'm going to work through it. Then I'm going to pull the next thing. And I'm only going to pull in enough stuff that I have capacity for. So that's when WIP, work in progress limitations and stuff like that come into play. But for me, it's always been about the work and the team. And so I try to look at the team, I try to look at the work and try to figure out what framework will work best for them, especially when scaling too. Because I have you have a lot of companies that want to scale and they want 100 teams doing Scrum and this, that, and other, and they always turn to Safe. And Safe is cool, but like there are so many different ways that you can scale. But the people at Safe have done a wonderful job of marketing. So they are very into Bank of America or these large corporations. And so so to answer your question, I'm getting a little long with it. It's more so about the type of work and the type of team structure that can help with that framework can help.
Definitely. Okay. Appreciate it.
Mm-hmm. What else?
No more questions. Well, Ms. Adrian, I want to thank you for giving us the rundown on Scrum tonight. Not Scrum, but Agile and Scrum. So definitely we'll look to invite you back in the future to see how we can incorporate those skills into our team. So definitely thank you for that. We do have a few more announcements, guys, before we end up tonight.